Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the Kevin Michael Grace Show. I thought I would start today by talking about science, because what we are seeing with the COVID-19 hysteria, the sanitary dictatorship, is the apotheosis of science. I wrote today on Twitter, science is due for a reckoning. Economic science led to globalism, just-in-time supply chains dominated by China. Medical science led to the COVID-19 hysteria, a cratered economy, a totally atomized society, and the suppression of basic civil rights. Tomorrow on the book club, I will be talking about Walker Percy's Lost in the Cosmos, which is a book about consciousness and man's place in the universe. Percy explains in the book that the overthrow of the old order, the previous views of man's place in the cosmos being dethroned, there are two main alternatives to that. One being the artistic view, and the other one being the scientific view. He explains that art is a way for us to attempt to understand the world. But this creates problems for the artists because when they are not creating, they must deal with the real world, which Percy explains is one of the reasons why so many artists are drunks or sexual degenerates or constantly on the move, homeless. And then there is science. Oh, yes, I should mention, he says, of course, that people who are not artists can partake of art, which may exalt them for a period of time, but then there is what Percy calls the re-entry problem. So that brings us to science, and science is the most highly valued thing in the world today. Scientists have replaced the priesthood. They tell us how the universe is ordered. And he explains that science, of course, is something that can be appreciated, can be used as a way of coping by people who are not scientists. But they have a problem, these people, which is that they do not experience the joy of being scientists. Now, it's my view, which you've heard many times today, that we are living in a matriarchy, or as the Z blogger prefers to say, a gynocracy. There was a fascinating article yesterday on VDare by Lance Welton. It's official. Young white leftist females are nuts. One of the most iconic images of the last decade is the youngish female social justice warrior collapsing to the ground and emitting what has been described as a visceral primal scream at the precise moment that Donald Trump was officially inaugurated as president of the United States. The protesters seemed to embody every stereotype about the young liberal snowflake female: childish, attention-seeking, and most obviously of all, mentally unstable, unable to cope with life's disappointments and setbacks. A body of research by psychologist Lee Jussum has found most stereotypes are empirically accurate. And new research, so far only tweeted by the researcher in question, has shown that this stereotype to be more accurate than most. If you meet a liberal female under the age of 30, there is more than a 50% chance that she will have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And of course, I'll just comment that being diagnosed with a mental health disorder, or self-diagnosing, as so many young people do today, is another way of attempting to cope with what Walker Percy suggests is a deranged world. Zach Goldberg, whose Twitter profile explains that he's a PhD student wokeness studies scholar researching the Great Awakening, has analyzed the latest data set released by the reputable Pew Research Center. This is the Pew Research Panel, Wave 64, which interviewed a representative sample of 11,537 American adults between March 19th and March 24th. In analyzing the data set, what really caught Goldberg's attention was differences in whether interviewees had ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition among the white sample. Zach Goldberg writes on Twitter, "I didn't write this thread to mock white liberals or their apparently disproportionate rates of mental illness, and you shouldn't either. Rather, this is a question that's underexplored and which may shed light on attitudinal differences towards various social policies. Overall, and with one exception, white moderates, those in the 18 to 29 age group are more likely to report being diagnosed with a mental health condition. The differences among white liberals, though, are striking. Almost half of white liberals in this cohort report a diagnosis. Among those aged 18 to 29, some 20.9% of those who describe themselves as conservative answered yes to the question, has a doctor or healthcare provider ever told you that you have a mental illness condition? For those in the age group who were political moderates, it was 26.3% who said yes, but those who self-classified as liberal, it was an astonishing 45.9%. So to be clear, almost half of young white American leftists have been diagnosed with a mental illness. In general, females are more likely to suffer from mental health conditions than males because one of the most common of these conditions is depression. According to psychologist Daniel Nettle in his 2007 book, Personality, What Makes You the Way You Are, females, being more prone to worry and anxiety, are more prone to depression than males. So Jonathan Haidt, known for his moral foundations theory of political preferences, whereby liberals and conservatives have a fundamentally different system of morality, asked Goldberg if he had broken down the data by sex. And Goldberg analyzed the data again, breaking it down by sex. The results were as predicted and were all the more striking. According to Pew, 56% of liberal females aged 18 to 29 have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, compared to 33.6% of liberal males in this age band. Goldberg commented that this is the biggest sex gap by far in this particular data set, meaning that young liberal females are, for some reason, particularly strongly prone to mental illnesses. So what does this have to do with the COVID-19 hysteria? Well, if you go onto Twitter and you look at the debate raging about social distancing, or what has been called the lockdown, you will find that women are far more likely to endorse this than men, and younger women even more so. And it's simply a commonplace on Twitter now that suggestions that social distancing should be eased, that the lockdown should be ended, are met with hysterical responses, screaming, profanity-laced responses. Think of Greta Thunberg. How dare you? How dare you? Of course, Greta has been diagnosed with several mental health conditions. Notwithstanding that, she is considered to be a world leader, perhaps the greatest world leader. She is the person who is going to lead us to the millennium, as it were. That these same women who are screaming obscenities against those who want an end to the lockdown are those very same people who are constantly boasting that they believe in science. And you see a similar thing on the right, on the conservative right, with people like Ben Shapiro wittering on about facts and logic, as if facts and logic are somehow going to explain man's role in the universe, or one's own role in the universe. And I think that what we have seen here with COVID-19 is the result of matriarchal thinking, that risk is bad, that risk is evil, that risk must be eliminated. Of course, it's impossible to eliminate risk from life entirely, and life is largely a trade-off between various kinds of risk. But the harm-based thinking, which is exemplified by the feelings of women, liberal women, now dominates our world. And I suppose in retrospect, it would have been somewhat easy to guess what the response of these women to COVID-19 would have been, which is shut the world down. We must crush the economies, we must totally atomize society, and we must suppress even the most basic civil liberties. But it seems that this appreciation of science is really not sufficient to enable proper life, an integrated life, a holistic life. I think this is one of the lessons of the COVID-19 hysteria. There have been various demonstrations against the lockdown. And someone called Ellen Anders, who describes herself as a woman, human being, fashion industry vet. All people deserve to be treated like human beings, no troll zone, likes, retweets aren't endorsements. She tweeted yesterday, who is organizing these protests? Bannon, Russia, Koch Network, Mercers, Stephen Miller, Ivanka, Jared. This is not a grassroots thing. This is like the Tea Party, which was also not grassroots. Well, actually, the Tea Party, as it was originally, was very much a grassroots movement. It was a kind of American version of what they had in France in the 1950s, Poujadism, the revolt of the shopkeepers. But this woman, Ellen Anders, finds it absolutely inconceivable that there are people out there who would have a different view to hers. It must be bots who are responsible for this, because science tells us that the lockdown must continue, well, indefinitely. I suppose until a Bill Gates approved vaccine is developed. And when will that be? I don't know. Could be 18 months to 2 years. My response to her was, who are these common, frightful little people? Their fashion sense is truly deplorable. See what I did there? So I guess the latest news is that Donald Trump has called on governors with beautifully low coronavirus numbers to open on May the 1st. This is from Axios. He was speaking to American governors on a conference call today, and he wants to begin to reopen the U.S. economy on May the 1st. He called on governors with low coronavirus numbers to begin to reopen their economies on that day, with the caveat that states should go at their own pace. You states with beautifully low numbers, let's get your states open and get back to work. The White House distributed a document of guidelines for opening up America again that offers proposed phased reopenings in states or regions that meet certain gating criteria. It includes metrics around cases, symptoms, and hospital capacity. It also includes 3 distinct phases for states, beginning when they satisfy an initial list of progress based on the metrics above. 1, a slightly softer lockdown with a phased reopening of some offices and social distancing still encouraged. 2, for non-vulnerable population, life returns largely to normal. Non-essential travel can resume for non-vulnerable populations. 3, for vulnerable populations, life can begin to normalize, but with social distancing for those people. Well, obviously there is going to be a pushback, resistance to that. In his daily press briefing, Trump said, we're starting our life again. We're starting rejuvenation of our economy again. This is a gradual process. But again, how can we start our life again? How can we rejuvenate our economy again when there's still risk out there? When the COVID-19 virus is still there, waiting, lurking, planning. It's going to come back in a second wave, perhaps more dangerous than the first. Can we afford to take the risk? And the scientists, the experts, who are backed up most forcefully and shrilly by female liberals, says no, that is not acceptable. And let's see, Reuters reports New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has tapped high-powered consultants to develop a science-based plan for the safe economic reopening of the region that can thwart pressure from President Donald Trump to move more rapidly, state government sources said. Cuomo, along with many other U.S. governors, shut all non-essential businesses. It's very amusing to me. Well, it's also infuriating. Apparently, the governor of New York or any other governor can decide what is essential and non-essential. I would think that a great many Americans consider barbershops to be essential, but no. Weed dispensaries, yes. Barbershops, no. And of course, these businesses are very much essential to the people who own them, run them, and work in them, but this is not relevant criteria. Governors from 7 East Coast states formed a coalition on Monday to develop a joint reopening plan. 3 governors from the West Coast formed a similar plan. The 10 states, mostly led by Democrats, together make up 38% of the U.S. economy. And as I will be explaining a little later, this points to another binary division in America. As part of Cuomo's effort, McKinsey and Company is producing models on coronavirus testing, infections, and other key data points that, along with other research and expert opinions, will help underpin decisions on how and when to reopen the region's economy. Danny Lever, communications director for Cuomo, said McKinsey had been primarily helping New York analyze the COVID-19 surge, such as hospital capacity and infection rates. Well, I guess they were doing a pretty bad job because apparently New York hospitals were going to be overrun. And New York hospitals they're at, 20% capacity and dropping. Oh, and there was the mad claim that all of these ventilators were needed when it turned out that they were not needed. The goal is to Trump-proof the plan, said an advisor to New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Now, you will recall that Tucker Carlson was speaking to Governor Murphy, and he asked him if he had consulted the Bill of Rights before taking lockdown measures, and Murphy said no, he had not. The goal is to Trump-proof the plan. Okay, so we think Trump ultimately will blink on this, but if not, we need to push back, and we're reaching out to top experts and other professionals to come up with a bulletproof plan. Trump, whose re-election bid was built on a strong economy before it was derailed by the epidemic, no, that's not exactly what happened, but never mind that, is losing patience with the economic shutdown and has challenged governors who are preaching caution, setting the stage for larger clashes over the pace of the reopening. Trump said in late March that he hoped to reopen the economy by Easter in mid-April, but the mounting toll of infections and projected deaths forced him to extend federal guidelines to the end of April. More than 30,000 people have died in the United States from the epidemic. Well, you can always get very large numbers if you decide to count every death as a coronavirus death, and the United States is pretty close to that. There's no question in my mind that the Democrats see coronavirus COVID-19 as the weapon that they will use to elect Senator Joe Biden or whoever might replace him, maybe the love gov himself, Andrew Cuomo. Because if Trump manages to shepherd the United States and its economy and its society through this crisis, his chances of re-election are very high indeed. So we have the protests all over the United States. The Guardian, armed protesters demand an end to Michigan's coronavirus lockdown. And there are a picture of 3 men, and they're all wearing baseball caps, and one of them is wearing camo pants, the other 2 are wearing jeans, and 2 of them are holding rifles, which obviously means that they must be very bad people, because who needs a gun? Especially an assault rifle. Good people don't own guns. That's certainly the Guardian view. They're a bunch of yahoos, terrible, deplorable fashion sense. From the New York Times, you have to disobey. Protesters gather to defy stay-at-home orders. In Michigan, thousands of demonstrators in cars jammed the streets around the state capitol in Lansing. In Frankfort, Kentucky, dozens of people shouted through a Capitol building window, nearly drowning out Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, as he held a news conference. And in Raleigh, North Carolina, at least one woman was arrested during a protest that drew more than 100 people in opposition to a stay-at-home rule. More protests against the lockdown have been planned in other states, including Texas, Oregon, and California, as the economic and health effects of the coronavirus mount across the country. In the last 4 weeks, more than 22 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits. Still, public health experts warn that returning to normal behavior too soon, particularly with ongoing testing shortages, could exacerbate the spread of the virus. And the clear implication here is that there will never be a return to normal behavior. That the elite, in its wisdom, has decided, I suppose, that the ordinary people just had too many privileges, and I guess they just had too much money, too many jobs for these ordinary people. They don't need jobs. We'll just send them a check for $1,200 a month, and they can learn to love beans, which apparently, according to Tyler Cowen, are delicious if properly prepared. At recent rallies in Ohio, New York, and Michigan, many organizers and demonstrators, some who came armed, oh dear, were aligned with anti-government activists on the right and libertarian groups. Some had affiliations with the Tea Party, oh dear again, and displayed the "Don't Tread on Me" logo that was an unofficial slogan for the movement, and at least one protester in Michigan waved a Confederate flag. Others waved banners in support of Trump and protested Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the woman with the strangely immobile face, by chanting, "Lock her up." So let's go to the chat. Let's see what's happening there. They blinded us with science, says Metal Mike. Yes, indeed. Don from Beyond said scientism has taken over. Yes, this was the distinction that Thomas Zaz made decades ago. Metal Mike adds, grandmothers sitting alone on park benches are now being fined in Toronto. Michael Mabus says, your enunciation is amazing. If you released a speech course, I would buy it. Also, Tweed Blazer is fine. Yes, this is Harris Tweed. Michael Mabus says, left-wing women being insane also rings true in my experience and going to college. Well, I suppose it's easy to pick on these women, but what is their place in society? Marriage is now optional. Childhood is optional. I suppose they're expected to become wedded to a career and become cool wine ants. It's really a sad life. Okay, is KMG streaming from the back of a museum? No, it's a hotel room, as I've been here for, a week and a half now. Visionary Companion says they love science so much they just gotta be profane. Metal Mike says Tea Party was co-opted by the GOP establishment. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Yes, the experts have arrived, and we are going to turn your political movement into something important, and it just became the typical Chamber of Commerce stuff. Lecomte de Berea says the new religion of science with its who priests. I don't know, who is kind of a tough sell right now. Don from Beyond says Bill Gates hosted a pandemic drill in New York in October 2019. John S. says, y'all notice KMG sound is back to not quite right. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Let's have a little less gain. Is that any better? Just let me know what you think. Mirage says with hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, and zinc, the risk from COVID-19 is so low, we should have opened up yesterday. The only limiting factor should be how many doses we can secure? Well, zinc is available at any drugstore and many supermarkets, and I have been using it for decades. Don from Beyond says the plan is mandatory vaccines along with mandatory ID proving one has been vaccinated. COVID equals certificate of vaccination ID. I like that. Okay. Old Major says assault rifle is a term the Democrats made up. Yes, yes, I know that. Michael Mavis says kids 50 years from now. What is a hug? People did that back then? Gross. While typing in a self-contained pod. It's amazing how quickly people forget the world of yesterday, and by the world of yesterday, I mean a generation ago. As I've mentioned previously, if you watch films made in the 1980s or 1990s even, what do you mean someone has to get to a phone? That's ridiculous. Everyone carries a phone. Well, they didn't used to. Oh, okay. Well, then they could send a message from their laptops. No, there weren't any laptops then, really. Also, there was no internet before 1995. And even I, at my advanced age, increasingly find this rather ridiculous. I mean, how could it have been like that? Okay, Don from Beyond says, I think the sound is fine. Okay. Alex DeLarge says, I don't understand why people are getting worked up over the idea of a vaccination certificate. Even if the government didn't mandate having proof, companies would demand it. Yeah, and Bill Gates will decide exactly how many vaccinations we must have, or else, we won't be able to have a life. Vox Day says, what does KMG think of E. Michael Jones? I'm familiar with his work. I certainly like his main points. No question about that. Interestingly, I interviewed him some years ago. He was quite brusque. Quite brusque. Okay, so let's get back to it. Oh yes, science. Scientists are facts. They're all about facts and logic. I should mention that Walker Percy was trained as a scientist and graduated with a medical degree from Columbia University. He contracted tuberculosis while dissecting a patient, and he was forced to abandon the medical profession, much to his relief, as he said later. Here's a story from Breitbart. I believe this is a story that's gone viral. Florida doctors who stole Trump 2020 flag arrested. So these are the science people. These are the people who are all about facts and logic. Deputies arrested Jeffrey Michael Fraiche and Laura Ann Webb Fraiche, 41 and 38 respectively, and charged them with 1 count of criminal mischief, 1 count of trespassing, 1 count of larceny, and 1 count of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The AP reported that they were later released from the county jail. They are accused of stealing the flag on April the 7th while they were with their 2 children, according to Ring surveillance video of the incident. According to a Santa Rosa County Sheriff's report, they used a ladder to pull the flag down. Their neighbor said their actions caused $500 in damage to the base of the flagpole, and the cost to replace the flag itself is $200. He intended to pursue charges. Fraiche and Webb Fraiche's arrest reports say they work as gynecologists at 2 different hospitals. Their representative, Matt Gaetz, Republican, said, shocking video. Physician parents possessed with real Donald Trump hatred so much that they steal a senior citizen's Trump flag with kids in tow. The little boy is begging them to stop. Apparently 2 medical degrees lack the decency and common sense of a child. Reuters reports Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer faces at least 2 federal lawsuits challenging her April 9th executive order to combat the coronavirus outbreak, including requirements that residents stay at home and most businesses close. The plaintiffs in Wednesday's lawsuit reasonably fear that the draconian encroachments on their freedom set forth in this complaint will unfortunately become the new norm, according to their complaint. The governor's order provides that residents cannot leave their homes except for essential services such as food or medical supplies or engage in outdoor physical activity. It also bans travel to second homes and vacation properties. Businesses, meanwhile, cannot require workers to leave their homes unless they are necessary for basic operations or to sustain or protect life, like grocery store and healthcare workers and law enforcement. Both lawsuits say Whitmer's order deprives residents of their constitutional right to associate with other people under the First Amendment and their right to due process. Constitution is a living document, as we are told. And apparently, according to the governor of the governor of New Jersey, there is no right to free assembly. And can we really allow free speech when people are spreading misinformation which kills people? Yes. Too risky. Too risky. This is from New York Magazine's Intelligencer. 1 month ago, President Trump stood in the White House press room and told Americans to stay home to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. Avoid gathering groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts, Trump said, finally seeming to recognize the gravity of the global pandemic. The gravity of the global pandemic is that the death rate from COVID-19 is anywhere from 0.37 to 0.1. So there's something else going on here. This would seem to be a test, and liberty has not survived this test. Will liberty return? Basic civil rights return? Well, we shall see. From Politico, the shutdown backlash is coming soon with a vengeance. It's possible to support the stay-at-home order and still deeply resent it. I guess that would be the ideal, wouldn't it? To adopt a protocol which is absolutely ridiculous and repugnant, but we're on the right side. We're on the side of science. Oh, of course we all hate it. They don't hate it. These people, they love it. They absolutely love it. Laughter has been banned indefinitely during the pandemic by order of all but a few holdout governors on the unanimous recommendation of health experts. Many people, however, found it challenging to abide by the rules early in the crisis when Libertarian Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky announced that he had caught coronavirus, or more precisely, that coronavirus had caught him. They had to conceal their amusement by directing laughter and potential airborne germs into bent elbows. What kind of sick person is entertained by the sickness of another person? I don't know, John F. Harris. How many jokes are based on the idea of sickness or infirmity or accident? Is deafness funny? How many deaf jokes are there? Hello, I can't hear you. Oh no, yes, I have got new shoes, and the joke is that you asked about something completely different. Well, the kind of person who enjoys discovering new evidence that political gods have a sense of humor. Just as there are famously no atheists in a foxhole, it would seem that there are few small government libertarians in the midst of a pandemic. I'm not a libertarian myself, but part of the narrative here is that we all love big government. We all love big government, and we need more and more government. It's just nowhere near big enough. Government already takes an interest in absolutely every single thing that anyone does, but that's not enough. And apparently, as I say, there's just too much private employment out there. It's not well-paid employment, but it's private, and it needs to be ended to be replaced by $1,200 a month checks to buy cheap chalupas. Now that Rand Paul has recovered, he says he felt fine and symptom-free the whole time. Is it a good time to ask, are we sure that the pandemic joke will ultimately be on him? Yeah, okay. I wanted to talk about some essays from William Briggs. He's been doing great work. You can find him on the internet at wmbriggs.com. His post today is called "Everybody Now Dies of Coronavirus." It begins with discussing something I was talking about yesterday. You will have already seen the headline, "New York City death toll soars past 10,000 in revised virus count." Yes, this happened right after our last update. They're trying it in Europe too. They don't, in the New York Times article, give a solid justification for this maneuver, except to say this. What New Yorkers are interested in and what the country is interested in is that we have an accurate and complete count, according to Dr. Barbeau, an expert. It's part of the healing process that we're going to have to go through. When I am emperor, Briggs comments, I will ban the use and publication of healing process. The naive model, which is of the reporting process we've been using, can't, of course, see midstream redefinitions of the reporting process, especially one is suspicious of this. If they're going to say everyone who dies does so with coronavirus, well, it will be one way to bring the reported counts in line with model projections. They can then say the models were right, and that our well-designed panic strategy was fully justified. It reminds us of this redefinition when we redo the model. Obviously, the totals will now be higher, but as I've said 10,000 times, we model the reporting of deaths, not actual deaths. How can we sort this out? We can't. Just like the flu, the best we'll be able to do is to look at the count of all deaths from all causes and see how big a spike we got this late winter, early spring compared to other years. They can juice the coronavirus death totals, but I don't think they do the same to the all deaths count. I mean, they can say 1 million more died in March than actually died, but someone's going to go looking for the bodies and discover they're not there. CDC reports the all death totals, which I highlighted 2 updates ago. Problem is they're always at least a month behind on these things. Even in the best case, we can't get estimates of excess deaths until the end of May, maybe even later if people realize how politically damaging these numbers are likely to be. Maybe I'm too cynical, but if the numbers are really bad, by which I mean excess deaths are like a bad flu year, then there might be announced difficulties in collecting data, and that sadly numbers won't be available. I doubt this will happen, but it might. Much more likely is that they will say, whatever the totals are, our lockdown saved lives. They'll never be able to explain why the lockdowns were necessary here and weren't in other countries like Taiwan that did better. Or if they are, look for somebody with the audacity to say it was because the American panic was also responsible for saving lives elsewhere because fewer people traveled, fewer people emulated the United States, etc. Another result of juicing the numbers is that polls will be able to use them to prolong their control. Nobody will remember the juicing. It's probably already forgotten, even though only 2 days old. Or people will just accept the maneuver because the government loves us. People are growing sick of it all, though, at last. Michiganders rose up, God bless them, and tooted their horns against their hubristic governor. Whitmer looked out upon the mini-mob and said, the enemy is the virus, not each other. Can Gretchen Whitmer really be that thick? Oh, the enemy is the virus, not each other. That's why we have been deliberately made terrified of every single other person on Earth. And we must stay at least 6 feet or 2 meters or perhaps 24 to 27 meters away from every single other person on Earth because we'll get infected and then we will die. So Briggs was writing about the source of this nonsense yesterday. Should we have trusted expert epidemiological models? Neil Ferguson and his Imperial College COVID-19 response team colleagues scared the world silly in mid-March. They announced they ran a sophisticated epidemiological model which said doom was on the way. And I'll remind listeners that this sophisticated epidemiological model is thousands upon thousands of lines of uncommented upon C code written 13 years ago. It is a black box. Ferguson and crew said that if we did nothing to stop the coronavirus, that in total, in an unmitigated epidemic, we would predict approximately 510,000 deaths in Great Britain and 2.2 million in the US, not accounting for the potential negative effects of health systems being overwhelmed on mortality. If there were negative effects, and if we did nothing, the totals would soar even higher. To avoid this apocalypse, the authors recommended two possible strategies. The first was mitigation, and the second was suppression. And the team went on to suggest suppression rather than mitigation. Even if the range of measures they suggested were to be adopted, and in the most effective mitigation strategy examined, which leads to a single relatively short epidemic, and even if all patients were able to be treated, we predict there would still be in the order of 250,000 deaths in Great Britain and 1.1 to 1.2 million in the U.S. Reported deaths of this writing in the United Kingdom are 11,329. The model itself is from a class of epidemiological tools used by Imperial College and organizations like the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, Bill Gates again, that mathematically represent several aspects of human behavior: the supply and use of hospital resources, virulence, and theoretical transmissibility of diseases and the like. These models are hideously complex, but then so is the subject or subjects being modeled. And again, that is the subject of the book we're going to be talking about tomorrow, Lost in the Cosmos by Walker Percy. People are strange. People are the strangest thing in the cosmos. Briggs continues, human behavior and practice is so difficult to predict that nobody has yet claimed to have mastered it. If somebody has, think of the killing he could make in the stock market. Yet these models claim to foretell what a country of 66.7 million souls, that's Great Britain, would do under the circumstances of a novel pandemic under a range of posited government behavioral suppression tactics. Besides the expertise of the model creators, what evidence had we to believe the Imperial College model? Again, their model predicted that if the government did nothing, about 510,000 would die in Great Britain and 2.2 million in the US. These are staggering numbers. They are, as I said before, 66.7 million people in the UK and 328.2 million in the US. The model predicted that deaths per day per 100,000 population would peak at around 21 in Great Britain around June 1st and 17 in the US around June 20th. These figures translate into about 14,000 deaths per day and 56,000 per day in the US at the peak, per day. These numbers are astounding, and it's shocking anyone swallowed them. Perhaps those that did so because the predictions are presented in terms of so many deaths per 100,000 and not in plain numbers. The Spanish flu of 1918 was a horrific event. It befell a world fresh from global war, one with poor medical care, aspirin poisoning, shortages of every kind. Between 17 and 58 million people were killed worldwide. The CDC estimated that about 675,000 Americans died when the population in the US was around 106 million. This makes 637 per 100,000 dead of Spanish flu in the US. Imperial College predicted 670 per 100,000 would die of coronavirus. When the COVID-19 response team constructed their model on 16th of March, there were only 6,470 deaths confirmed worldwide and 97 in the US. Yet somehow, in the presence of modern medicine and these low figures, coronavirus was predicted to be deadlier than the Spanish flu. This is idiotic. The model should have been strapped to a ventilator, not used to form the basis of global policy. But they're experts. Dr. Neil Ferguson is an expert with the all-expert Imperial College. Imperial College has made many, many models to predict previous crises, and they've all been wrong, disastrously wrong, but that doesn't make any difference. It would appear that a great many people in the West, Canada and the US, they already have COVID-19. This is a story from Bloomberg yesterday. 1 in 7 New Yorkers may have already gotten COVID-19. Well, that's quite a few. And preliminary findings from New York and Iceland seem to show that in places very hard hit by COVID-19, a surprisingly large number of people have been infected with it, and that in the rest of the world, very few have. This means that the occasional hopeful suggestions that the coronavirus is already widespread globally and herd immunity will be putting an end to the pandemic any minute now will most likely be They're bunk. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Isn't it supposed to be about facts and logic? Maybe it's, as I say, they called it. It's going to come back. It's unkillable. It will just keep coming back and scything us down until there's no one left. I guess we're just going to have to, go back to a subsistence economy, get close to the earth again. Of course, that will mean a massive Malthusian die-off of literally billions of people. A fatality rate of about 1% happens to be the estimate arrived at the first major disease severity study published back in February by the much-cited COVID-19 modeling team at Imperial College London. Oh, wait a minute. How do we get to hundreds of thousands of deaths then? That doesn't make any sense at all. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who is a board-certified family practitioner in Monroe, New York, he wrote on April the 12th, for the last 16 years, I've cared for approximately 75% of the adult population of Kiryas Joel, which is a very close-knit community of approximately 35,000 people in which the COVID-19 infection spread rapidly and unchecked prior to the imposition of social distancing. As of today, my team has tested hundreds of people from this community for COVID-19, and approximately 61% of the results have been positive. If extrapolated to the entire community, this means more than 20,000 people are infected at the present time. Of this group, I estimate that there are 1,500 patients who are in a generally accepted high-risk category, e.g. above 60, immunocompromised, comorbidities, underlying respiratory issues. Given the urgency of the situation, I developed the following treatment protocol in the pre-hospital setting and have seen only positive results. 1, any patient with shortness of breath is treated. 2, any patient in a high-risk category with mild symptoms is treated. 3, young, healthy, and low-risk patients, even with symptoms, are not treated. My outpatient treatment regime is as follows. Hydroxychloroquine, 200 milligrams twice a day for 5 days. Erythromycin, 500 milligrams once a day for 5 days. Zinc sulfate, 220 milligrams once a day for 5 days. The rationale for my treatment plan is as follows. I combined the data available from China and South Korea with a recent study published from France. These 3 drugs are well known and usually well tolerated, hence the risk to the patient is low. Since the 15th of March, my team has seen approximately 1,354 patients in Monroe, New York, with either test-proven or clinically suspected coronavirus infection. The majority of the patients were treated with only supportive care. Patients with shortness of breath or in the high-risk category were treated with the above regimen, approximately 405 patients at this point. Of this group and the information provided to me by affiliated medical terms, we have had 2 deaths, 6 hospitalizations for pneumonia, and 4 intubations, all extubated now. In addition, I have not heard of any negative side effects other than the approximately 10% of patients with temporary nausea or diarrhea. In sum, my urgent recommendation is to initiate treatment in the outpatient setting as soon as possible in accordance with the above. So it could be that herd immunity was the right idea all along, not social distancing, not a lockdown, not the collapse of society. Herd immunity with off-the-shelf treatments. But I guess that wouldn't leave enough room for the experts to swing their weight around. Let's see what Alex Berenson has to say. He has been one of the few voices of sanity, although we're getting more and more of these people. A bit of sanity from the city of Jacksonville, beaches and parks reopening tomorrow, and that is certainly good to hear. He says, as I told Buck Sexton, my wife is a physician who treats COVID patients, and we do not take any special precautions at home. We know the real risks and are much more worried about frightening our children unnecessarily. To give you yet again a sense of the real risks to young people, here's the most recent data from Florida, which shows the same pattern as Spain or New York or anyone else, just presented in an easy-to-see way. 1,900 cases in people under 25, no deaths. 2,500 cases in people over 75, 360 deaths. By the way, even looking up all the way to under 55, there were 44 deaths out of 13,000 infections and Florida has 20 million people. Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio, who was subject to protests, says his state will begin to end its lockdown in 2 weeks. So, let's see, which deaths count towards the COVID-19 death toll? It depends on the state. This is from the Washington Post. Now, so when we're talking about, deaths from COVID-19, or even deaths associated from them, we don't have any hard numbers. In Alabama, officials have ruled that 1 out of every 10 people who died with COVID-19 did not die of COVID-19. In Italy, it turned out to be, 82%? But in Alabama, only 10%. Colorado, by contrast, has included some deaths where the disease caused by the coronavirus was deemed probable based on symptoms and possible exposure, but not confirmed through a test. This is scientism with a vengeance. It is our interest that dead people have COVID-19 written on their foreheads so we can jack those numbers up and keep the panic going. The Centers for Disease Control updated its website this week to explicitly say that cases where the infection was not confirmed by a test may now be counted. Science, people. And so what's the pandemic? What's the plan for us? Well, too many people are shooting their mouth off. Too many people are saying things which are not approved by experts. And I think that has to come to an end. And not just about COVID-19. People are making wild claims about immigration and migrants and the like. The experts say very different things. This is from the AP today. Facebook will soon let you know if you saw or interacted with dangerous coronavirus misinformation on the site. I didn't think it'd be possible for me to hate Facebook more than I already do, but there you go. The new notice will be sent to users who have liked, reacted to, or commented on posts featuring harmful or false claims about COVID-19 after they have been removed by moderators. The alert, which will start appearing on Facebook in the coming weeks, will direct users to a site where the World Health Organization lists and debunks virus myths and rumors. To recap, the World Health Organization said at the beginning of this panic that there was no evidence that coronavirus was communicable between people. The World Health Organization said that COVID-19, not a big deal. The big deal, stigmatization, xenophobia, and racism. The World Health Organization is a ridiculous organization, and no one should take them seriously. They are in the pocket of the Communist Party of China. The latest move is part of an unprecedented effort by Facebook, Google, and Twitter that includes stricter rules, altered algorithms, and thousands of fact checks to contain an outbreak of bad information online that's spreading as quickly as the virus itself. Challenges remain. Tech platforms have sent home human moderators who police the platforms, forcing them to rely on automated systems to take down harmful content. They are also up against people's mistrust of authoritative sources for information such as the WHO. Now, I'm just kind of curious here. Does this story actually mention the World Health Organization and its disgraceful behavior? No. No, it doesn't, because I suppose that would lead to further mistrust of authoritative sources for information, such as the WHO. Through this crisis, one of my top priorities is making sure that you see accurate and authoritative information across all of our apps. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg wrote on his Facebook page Thursday. Question. If it turns out that the models were bogus, and this is, in fact, just like the flu or, say, a bad flu year, are these people going to apologize? Is the WHO going to apologize? Is Twitter going to apologize? Facebook? Google? Not bloody likely. Okay, so let's talk about China. China's very, very upset because they are being hammered, and even the media can't help but take part in this. According to Fox News, sources believe coronavirus outbreak originated in Wuhan lab as part of China's efforts to compete with the U.S. To compete with the United States in what? There's increasing confidence that the COVID-19 outbreak likely originated in a Wuhan laboratory, though not as a bioweapon, but as part of China's attempt to demonstrate that its efforts to identify and combat viruses are equal to or greater than the capabilities of the United States. Multiple sources who have been briefed on the details of early actions by China's government and seen relevant materials tell Fox News, this is like, how would your city react to an uprising? Chicago has X many deaths, X many shootings. Well, how about if they send a bunch of gunmen out there to shoot 10 times the number of people shot in Chicago over a weekend, just to see, how the authorities could deal with that? Do you think that would be a useful experiment? This may be the costliest government cover-up of all time. One of the sources said, these sources believe that the initial transmission of the virus, a naturally occurring strain that was being studied there, was back to human, and that patient zero worked at the laboratory, then went into the population in Wuhan. The increasing confidence comes from classified and open source documents and evidence. Fox News has requested to see the evidence directly. Sources emphasized, as is often the case with intelligence, that it's not definitive and should not be characterized as such. Some inside the administration and the intelligence and epidemiological communities, that's a first. That is a first. I've never heard the phrase epidemiological community again, and I hope I never hear it again. Some of them are more skeptical, and the investigation is continuing. Asked by Fox News' John Roberts about the reporting, President Trump remarked at Wednesday's coronavirus press briefing, more and more we're hearing this story, we're doing a very thorough examination of this horrible situation. And just if you haven't been listening to the live stream this week, it is a fact, this is not speculation, that senior American embassy and consular officials toured the laboratory in Wuhan in 2018, and they sent a report to the State Department, which was not complimentary. They claimed poor safety standards and thought that this was a possible serious threat. And that was reported by the Washington Post, which is not known to be a supporter of Donald Trump. Emerald Robinson tweets, it's been obvious from the beginning that coronavirus escaped from a Wuhan lab. Senator Tom Cotton tried to tell you, Zero Hedge tried to tell you, the War Room Pandemic guys tried to tell you, and I tried to tell you. Guess what? The corporate media is catching up just now. Oh, so what would this story be without a Canadian component? Sheila Gunn Reid of Rebel News reported yesterday, Justin Trudeau's government is funding a nearly $1 million Canadian coronavirus research project at the Wuhan China virus lab, suspected as the source of the deadly plague. According to the government website detailing the COVID-19 research disbursement, the $828,046 grant addresses the urgent need of rapid point-of-care diagnostics of COVID-19. The collaborative research is conducted by a multidisciplinary team of virologists, chemists, infectious disease specialists, frontline practitioners, and public health researchers from the University of Alberta, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and Wuhan Institute of Virology. Unfortunately, it seems the project relies heavily on the one lab that could be responsible for the outbreak. And she goes on to say that China lied and covered up the disease. A new AP investigation revealed that in the 6 days after top Chinese officials secretly determined they likely were facing a pandemic from a new coronavirus, the city of Wuhan, at the epicenter of the disease, hosted a mass banquet for tens of thousands of people. Millions began traveling through for Lunar New Year celebrations. Doctors in Wuhan were afraid, said Dali Yang, a professor of Chinese politics at the University of Chicago. It was truly intimidation of an entire profession. Why the Canadian government is giving even 1 cent to the People's Republic of China, is a question that only Justin Trudeau can answer. They're not exactly poor there in China anymore. According to Breitbart, a report at the Epoch Times on Tuesday said that despite the much ballyhooed grand reopening of Wuhan, the city at the heart of the coronavirus pandemic, and the confident proclamations of Chinese officials that the virus has all been but exterminated, quarantines are being quietly reimposed on residential compounds as new infections spread. Thousands flooded out of Wuhan last week by car, rail, and air after officials ceremonially lifted the lockdown order and pronounced the surrounding Hubei province to be coronavirus-free. However, residents of both Hubei and its neighboring provinces surreptitiously told foreign media they did not trust the Chinese Communist Party's declaration of victory over the virus. And of course, there were riots. We have video of this, of police vans being overturned and the like. So the people in the neighboring provinces, they were certainly not persuaded. I've mentioned this open letter, which apparently is being led by Irwin Cotler, former Canadian Justice Minister, and again, a very powerful person internationally. And now several prominent conservatives have added their name to this, including Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer, Conservative leadership candidates Peter MacKay and Aaron O'Toole, Conservative defense critic James Bizan, and New Brunswick Southwest MP John Williamson. Has signed on along with more than 100 political representatives and foreign policy experts from around the world. So this could become the new political divide in Canada. Do you love China or don't love China? Now, we know that the Trudeau government loves China. There are hostages, Canadian hostages in China, and the Trudeau government doesn't seem to be in any particular hurry to get them out or to take measures against China for taking Canadians hostage. My old colleague, Kelly Jane Torrance, writes in the New York Post, after China's deadly coronavirus lies, why is Europe trusting Beijing on 5G? Never has it been more obvious how deadly and depraved Xi Jinping's regime is. So why are some European countries still bent on letting that regime develop their 5G infrastructure? While Xi oversees a propaganda campaign aiming to make him look like the good guy, the coronavirus toll continues to mount. Nearly 2 million cases and 126,000 deaths worldwide. Healthcare systems driven to the brink, and Oxfam warning 500 million people could be driven into poverty from the economic fallout. Beijing has blood on its hands. The University of Southampton estimates 95% of coronavirus infections could have been averted had China acted 3 weeks earlier, but officials spent more than a month trying to hide the problem instead of acting to contain it or warn the world. So why did France recently decide, after all this was known, to allow Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei to supply part of its 5G network? Indeed, why is any nation in hard-hit Europe still willing to give this corrupt regime access to its most delicate data for some savings in cost and convenience? 5G, the next generation of wireless tech, promises faster speeds at higher bandwidths to enable a revolution in the Internet of Things, allowing everything from your Instant Pot to driverless cars to connect to the cloud seamlessly. Actually, I only discovered this recently, because I just assumed that 5G meant that our phones, our mobile phones, smartphones, are going to be working just so much at lightning speed. And now I find out that the main purpose of 5G is to allow our household appliances to spy on us. Why is this considered a good thing? You may have seen the meme that went around, the dishwasher. It was a Siemens dishwasher, and it said that software update has failed, and the dishwasher was then inoperative. Why does a dishwasher need a software update, and why does this software update need to be accessed, remotely? Can you just download it from the internet, plug it into a USB port? Toby Young continues his daily briefing, Lockdown Skeptics. The Times leads this morning with Chris Whitty's comment at yesterday's government press conference. The trend in new infections is beginning to flatten out, with the death toll remaining below 800 for the fourth day in a row. Does this mean that when Dominic Raab announces later today that the lockdown restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks, that's the expectation anyway, he will encourage some workers to return to work straight away? In Spain, people in manufacturing, construction, and some services were allowed to return to work on Tuesday. I should mention, on Vancouver Island, where I live, there don't seem to be any restrictions on construction, and construction is proceeding apace throughout Victoria. And he mentions the comments made by Major General Professor Isaac Ben Israel, chairman of the Israeli Space Agency and the National Council for Research and Development, which I discussed yesterday, saying that this is going to pretty much peter out in 40 days. One of yesterday's big stories was that Keith Starmer has demanded the publication of an exit strategy. He's the leader of the Labour Party. This was an interesting intervention, suggesting his attack line from now on will be that the government isn't doing enough to help the economy, not that it's done too little to suppress the spread of the virus. That is a nightmare for the Conservative Party, an absolute nightmare if Starmer can pull off this jujitsu. Oh, an amusing story from the New York Post from Kenya. And it truly is an amusing story, and I'm going to read a little bit from it. Kenyan governor blasted over plans to include Hennessy in coronavirus care packages. The governor of Nairobi, Kenya, was blasted on social media after announcing his plans to include small bottles of Hennessy in food packs being distributed to the city's poor families amid the coronavirus pandemic. Governor Mike Sonko presented the plans during a Tuesday media briefing. From the research which has been conducted by the WHO and various health organizations, it has been revealed that alcohol plays a very major role in killing the coronavirus or any sort of virus, Sonko said in a clip. That's not my understanding. Commenters were quick to blast the governor for his irresponsible statement. Is he serious? One wrote. I can't believe it. I still have to replay that video for the 10th time. Did he say Hennessy kills COVID-19 if you drink? Dr. Githinji Gitahi, the global CEO of Amref Health Africa, condemned Sonko in a tweet. Please ignore clowning of a major global pandemic taking lives and putting extreme pressure on households. Dump this the way you would dump your used COVID-19 mask, never to be recovered. Is he suggesting that Kenyans throw away their Hennessy? As I wrote on Twitter, placebos are powerful, and Hennessy is a totem of mastery. Couldn't hurt. Hennessy seems to occupy an important place in Black society. You know, when you got the Hennessy, that shows that you've made it. I like Hennessy. I think what other things that Black people like? They like menthol cigarettes, which I find disgusting. They love fried chicken, as I do. They love McDonald's, and yeah, I don't know. They like 40s. I'm not too keen on sipping wine out of a big bottle on the street. So sort of a mixed bag there. Oh, yes. Let's talk about what Shiva Naipaul, the late Shiva Naipaul, called universal mental retardation. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the expert's expert, Il Duce, the guru of COVID-19. Again, from the New York Post. Tired of having your sex life online during lockdown? You're in luck. Government coronavirus expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says that heart-sick isolationists can hook up with asymptomatic Tinder matches in real life, but like love, it involves some risk. The 79-year-old immunologist dropped the unorthodox dating tip in a Tuesday interview on Snapchat's Good Luck America. Toward the end of the tape segment, Fauci was asked, if you're swiping on a dating app like Tinder or Bumble or Grindr, and you match with someone that you think is hot, and you're just kind of like, maybe it's fine if this one stranger comes over, what do you say to that person? You know it's tough, replied the befuddled National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases director to the curveball. because that's what's called relative risk. Then he dropped the bombshell. If you're willing to take a risk, and everybody has their own tolerance for risks, do they, Dr. Fauci? Because you've been telling America that no, that is not true. No, 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 no. We are going to determine what is acceptable risk, and that if that means smashing the economy, the total atomization of society, and the suppression of civil liberties, so be it. But when it comes to hooking up, well, I guess hooking up must occupy a very important place in American culture. If you're willing to take a risk, and everybody has their own tolerance for risk, you could figure out if you want to meet somebody, said Fauci, who was named a candidate for People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive award. He added, if you want to go a little bit more intimate, well, then that's your choice regarding a risk. But don't invite every one of your Tinder matches over for a Caligula-esque orgy just yet. The unlikely date doctor subsequently pointed out that the one thing you don't want to do is to base your decision on whether the person is feeling well. If people only transmitted when they felt sick, that would be much easier. But what we're seeing, which becomes really problematic, is that there's a considerable amount of transmission from an asymptomatic person. How about that? How about that? I would have thought that someone in his position would know that hookups, particularly of the grinder variety, involve a considerable level of health risk and a considerable cost to governments. But, hooking up, come on, what are you going to do about it? Oh, yes, and the WHO has been disgraced, but the celebrities are deciding to get behind the WHO. This is from Breitbart. So the WHO is moving forward with its star-studded benefit concert on Saturday, which is expected to feature a bevy of Hollywood pop stars coming together virtually to lend a helping hand to the UN agency. Yes, the latest names to be added include Taylor Swift, Oprah Winfrey, and Jennifer Lopez. They're sheep. Sheep. Every single one of them. It is quite an impressive list of people that they have got here. And I will give you some of the names. Adam Lambert, Alicia Keys, Amy Poehler, Andrea Bocelli, Annie Lennox, Becky G, I don't know who that person is, Billie Eilish, I know who she is, Billie Joe Armstrong, Billy Ray Cyrus. Oh, yeah, Celine Dion, Chris Martin of Coldplay, Common, Connie Britton. Isn't she an actress? What is she going to do? Delta Goodrem, Don Cheadle, another actor, Eddie Vedder, Ellen DeGeneres, Ellie Goulding, Elton John, wow, real star power here, Heidi Klum, she's a model, she's a superannuated model, Jack Black, Jamila Jamil, yes, Britain's most annoying person, James McAvoy, Jason Segel, Jennifer Hudson, Jennifer Lopez, Jess Glynn, Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, John Legend, Casey Musgraves, Keith Urban, Kerry Washington, Kesha, Lady Antebellum, Lady Gaga, Long, the classical pianist, Lewis Hamilton, he's a Formula One race car driver, Liam Payne, Lily Reinhart from Riverdale, Lily Singh from Canada, Lily Tomlin, I didn't know if she was still alive. Who else we got here? LL Cool J. I didn't know that he was still around. Matthew McConaughey, Michael Bublé, the Canadian crooner. Neil Horan of Five Direction. Oprah Winfrey, Paul McCartney, Pharrell Williams, PK Subban, who's a retired hockey player. Rita Ora, or Rita Hora, as they call her on the gossip sites. Sam Smith, the sexually confused British singer. Samuel L. Jackson, Sarah Jessica Parker. Isn't she going to frighten people, particularly children? Shawn Mendes, Sheryl Crow, Stephen Colbert, Stevie Wonder, Taylor Swift, The Killers, Tim Gunn. Doesn't he have something to do with fashion? Yeah, they're beating down the doors, I would guess. I mean, no one wants to be left out of this. You know, at least with Live 7, we got a Pink Floyd reunion. Okay. Oh, yes. The Pope Francis. This is from the Daily Mirror. This is a disturbing story. Video footage of Pope Francis holding a bottle of scotch and calling it the real water of life was censored by the Vatican ahead of a new documentary. The clip featured the head of the Catholic Church accepting a bottle of Oban malt from a group of Scottish student priests at a reception at the Vatican's Apostolic Palace last year. But Vatican media insisted Il Papa's quip was cut from the film about seminarians at the Scots College in Rome before broadcast this Sunday. The director said, "We filmed the students meeting with the Pope in the Apostolic Palace. One of them was tasked with giving the Pope a bottle of malt because they know he likes whiskey. He was really down to earth with them all, and when they handed him the bottle, instead of just handing it to his assistant, as he normally would with a gift, he held it up and said," and my Italian is not very good, "Questa è la vera acqua santa," which means this is the real holy water. He guffawed with laughter, and it was a real icebreaker with the students and put everyone at ease. But we'd agreed that the Vatican's media office would be allowed to approve all of our footage before we broadcast it, so we sent them the files, and when they sent it back, that bit of him saying was cut out. Did they not think that this was going to become public knowledge? And once again, Pope Francis gives a very strong indication he doesn't believe in any of it. Okay. The operation was a success, but the patient died. Let's see. What were the... Oh, yes, in Germany, religious gatherings, restaurants, bars, cafes, cinemas, music venues, and large events are banned until August 31st, per Angela Merkel. Now, Angela Merkel was trending this day, and you had all of these people, including Mia Farrow, no less than Mia Farrow, raving about Merkel because she is a scientist. She is an expert. So she must know what she's doing. Now, of course, she's a politician. You know, she's not working in a laboratory. Now, what would an expert, I don't know, an expert in economics or sociology have to say with the importation of, what, 1.5 million to 2 million migrants, you know, from Syria, Afghanistan, etc., into Germany, given that most of them are likely never to hold a job, that at least 40% of them, it's reported by their champions to have serious mental problems. And then there's all the extra costs in translation and the extra policing and criminal costs. So, I mean, it was a political decision. All political decisions, you know, all decisions of this sort are political decisions. You can't say, oh, well, this is science. If it's a politician making the decision, it's a political decision. But the globalists then said that Western manufacturing is inefficient. A service economy will suit us just fine. This is the new normal. What are globalists saying now? Service work peons. Sorry, your workplaces will remain closed until further notice. This is the new normal. It's just, yeah, that's an awful shame about your service job. Turns out they're non-essential. But wait, you said they're non-essential. Shut up. Liz Wheeler tweets, 22 million Americans unemployed, not because of coronavirus, but thanks to government-mandated lockdowns. A virus didn't do this to us. Our politicians did. Think about that next time you cast your ballot. I quoted Alex Berenson before, and I'm going to quote him again because this is particularly to the point. Seems increasingly clear the people who have been so terribly hysterically wrong about this, more wrong by the day, are not going to admit their mistakes, much less ask for forgiveness for the damage they've done. They're just going to yell, the lockdowns worked. And everyone who has lost a job or can't pay his mortgage or her car note or didn't get to graduate high school or got locked at home with an abusive husband or had the cops called when he went to a playground is just going to have to accept that lie. Because really, we are not going to be able to function as a society otherwise. Not if half the country is afraid to go outside for a year and the other half wants to punch the doomers in the face for the harm their irrational fear has caused. Now, I'm going to quote Walker Percy again. He writes in Lost in the Cosmos, in recent years, a tremendous amount of effort and money has been spent by the government and primatologists in the effort to demonstrate that chimpanzees and other apes can learn human language. Chimps were adopted like children, and unlike children, were subjected to years of concentrated lessons in speech. When attempts to teach chimps to speak failed, sign language was substituted. Glowing successes were reported. Some chimps became famous. Yet the most recent assessments by responsible scientists are that primatologists have either deluded themselves or at least made exaggerated claims. It now appears that chimps are not using language after all, but are rather using signs and responses in order to obtain rewards, e.g. bananas. The basic elements of language are missing: symbols, sentence, productivity, cultural transmission. Now, even some of the most evangelical primatologists have modified their claims. In short, it appears that chimps can't talk with either their voices or their hands, or as Sebiok puts it, animals have communication but not language. Yet the public perception is that chimps and perhaps dolphins and the humpback whale have crossed the language barrier. There are speculations about the mathematical and metaphysical knowledge of dolphins. For example, according to a recent newspaper account, the song of a humpback whale has 10 times as many phonemes as does human speech. And he asked the question, why do people in general want to believe that chimps and dolphins and whales can speak? And why do scientists in particular want so badly to believe that chimps can speak that they will compromise their own science? Answer A, because anyone who has invested a reputation, a great deal of effort, time, and money in an experiment wants it to succeed. And his other answers, because in the last 300 years have seen the dethronement of man from what he believed to be a central position in the cosmos to an insignificant planet, Copernicus Galileo, from his uniqueness among the species as the only besouled creature and as created by God in his image, Darwin, and even from the sovereignty of his own consciousness, Freud. Yes. Was a scientist going to say, yeah, we screwed this up? Whoa, we screwed up big time. We're looking at, what, trillions of dollars of losses, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of deaths as a result of public policy that was based on our projections. Yeah, we're gonna retire from public life. You're never going to hear from us again. We are going to be in sackcloth and ashes until the day of our death. No, of course they're not going to say that. You know, it's like that line from David Mamet's movie Spartan, faking the death of the president's daughter. And Val Kilmer's, he's in Delta Force, and he says to an aide at the White House, he says, how do they fake the DNA? And she says, they don't fake the DNA, they just issue a press release. And that's what we're going to see here. There will be a flurry of press releases saying, we were right, we were absolutely right. And crushing the economy and total atomization of society and the suppression of even basic civil rights, a small price to pay. By the way, that may not be over now. It's probably not over. It's the new normal. Yes, NBC News reports 5 million more people filed jobless claims last week, bringing the total to almost 22 million in 1 month. Job well done, scientists. Job well done. So, in more economic news, professional gamblers in Nevada may now be able to collect unemployment. People who gamble for a living, MarketWatch reports, would not normally collect unemployment, but the statewide shutdown of casinos due to the coronavirus could change that. Universal mental retardation. There's no other way to describe it. Financial pressures of COVID-19 forced several Canadian small businesses to close permanently. You know, the longer they put this off, that is to say, restarting the economy, the more businesses are going to shut forever. I suspect in many cases because the people who own these businesses can no longer handle the stress. because everyone's being strung along now. It's another 2 weeks. It's another 3 weeks. No, just another 3 weeks. No, just another month. This is from CTV News. In Toronto, Vesuvio Pizzeria and Spaghetti House has been in operation since 1957. That's impressive. And was able to survive through some of the toughest times, but announced Tuesday that it would close permanently later this week. I think that everyone's feeling a bit how we are feeling, heartbroken, and well, it hurts. In Aldergrove, BC, Emerald Phoenix Comics announced on April 4th it would no longer make rent. In Halifax, Najib Ferris, the owner of Mabata Fine Dining, had been planning to expand, but now is considering a permanent closure. Many such cases, as Donald Trump would say. A survey of almost 11,000 Canadian small businesses from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business released Wednesday indicates that about 22% of small businesses have had their revenue drop to zero during the pandemic, while only half are confident their business will survive to the end of May under the current conditions. The end of May. What's that? That's 6 weeks away. And Justin Trudeau is saying, no, we can't go back to normal until we have a vaccine, and God knows when that will be. Good job, scientists. Oh, from Politico. Trump's call with Wall Street didn't go as planned. Wall Street to Trump, keep it shut. Do you hear that? Do you hear the peasants with the pitchforks gathering? Because I think that I hear it. Because Wall Street has been made whole, or almost whole, despite the fact that there was an enormous bubble. Wall Street to fly over America, drop dead. These people, I mean, they really should watch themselves, but they're incapable of it. They have been consumed by greed. Big day for the Dow today. Big day. It's up, over 700 points. And the futures for tomorrow, up 779 points. I suppose this could be in response to Trump making it clear that he really intends to reopen the American economy, and sooner rather than later. But these people on Wall Street, they are treading on thin ice. Very much so. Brendan O'Neill writes in Spike, journalists have got to stop asking about an exit strategy from the lockdown, said UK Health Minister Nadine Dorries. Yes, the price of matriarchy is eternal panic. Like others in government and many in the liberal left media too, she seems to find questions about the lockdown irritating, tough. We must keep asking when the lockdown will be eased and phased out for one very simple reason. The lockdown is having a devastating impact on the economy and on people's lives right now. There's emerging evidence that people could be dying as a result of the lockdown. And I mentioned several, somewhere around 2,500 unexpected deaths reported yesterday in Britain. It may be an indirect result in the sense that the lockdown is not a sentient being that came to their homes and killed them, but it seems real nonetheless. Accident and emergency chiefs in London are concerned that more people are dying of non-coronavirus related illnesses than normal because they were reluctant to leave their homes and be a burden on their local hospital. They believe that there has been a sharp rise in the number of seriously ill people dying at home. They report that dozens more people than normal are dying at home from cardiac arrests, for example, presumably because they do not want to impose upon our lockdown society and what is continually presented to us as a busy, stressed out health service. Well, I suppose that's noble if misguided for them. I can assure you that if I think I'm having a heart attack, I'm going directly to the hospital. The Royal College of GPs has noticed a spike in the number of people dying at home from salvageable illnesses. Paramedics report they are attending more house calls than normal, where patients suffering from cardiac arrest are already dead, presumably because people are calling 999 far later than they normally would. Things have got so bad that the NHS has had to issue a statement encouraging gravely ill or very concerned people to continue seeking emergency care. Seriously, is one of the ideas behind this lockdown that there's a surplus of old population or a surplus of sick people And this would be a neat way of getting rid a lot of them, not necessarily, to kill them, not necessarily to euthanize them, just make them so terrified and ashamed of going to the hospital that they just pop off at home. In week 14 of 2019, there were close to 160,000 emergency admissions to English hospitals. In week 14 of this year, there were about 60,000. Well, how about that? Furthermore, the Office for National Statistics reported a very large spike in weekly deaths last week, which was latched on by the pro-lockdown media and anti-government left as proof of the failings of Boris Johnson's government over COVID-19. Yet what far fewer commentators focused on was the fact that out of these extra 6,000 deaths, just over half of them were officially recorded as deaths from or with coronavirus. Yes, the lockdown is killing people. I'm going to get to the book club in just a minute, but let's talk about Canada again briefly, and I will update my chart here. 30,081 cases in Canada, 1,193 deaths. Canada has a population of 38 million people. By far, wow, these numbers have really moved ahead in Quebec over Ontario, which is odd because Ontario has a substantially larger population than Quebec, but perhaps the nursing homes in Quebec are all as dire and disgusting as recent news reports have suggested. Let's see, Saskatchewan, is rocketed up to 305 cases and still only 4 deaths. But the Premier doesn't want to open up anytime soon. Got to be certain. In BC, 1,561 cases. We have 5.1 million people here and 75 deaths. Let's see if that is truly the latest figures. I always check to see, what's happening on Vancouver Island. Okay. They have not updated this, but last time I checked, there were fewer than 80 cases on Vancouver Island. And let's see. We're up to 92 cases and 2 deaths. And it's lockdown here. Vancouver Island mayors call for ferry restrictions ahead of May long weekend. We have a national holiday called Victoria Day. And no fun on Victoria Day. You got to prohibit all non-essential ferry travel over the May long weekend. Why are they doing it? Because they can. And, yes, I already talked about Sheila Gunn Reid, and I'm going to take a brief detour into the chat before I get into Theater Thursday. Dan Ellison says, I think Oprah and Macca are the only ones who haven't been forgotten. PK Subban retired. I thought he was retired. I could be. I could be wrong. Okay. Face condom. A friend of mine I used to work with in radio in Edmonton, he was joking, back in the early 90s that, we should just wear bicycle helmets everywhere. No one should be allowed, to even walk around the house without a bicycle helmet because, people do trip and fall over. William Holden, the great actor, he was drunk one day in his house and he tripped on something and smacked his head on the edge of a coffee table and bled out on the floor. If he'd been wearing a bicycle helmet, then that could have been prevented. Of course, Robin, that was his name, Robin Allen, he was making fun of feminine hysteria, but it doesn't seem like much of a joke now anymore, does it? Alex DeLarge says, some people are clearly benefiting from this pandemic. Nobody has been able to explain to me how political leaders and the elite more broadly gain than this. Well, they're in charge, and they're making big decisions, and they're going to tell us, and this is obvious, that their disastrous decisions have been the correct ones. And the scientists are not going to disagree with them because the scientists stand to be just as disgraced or even more disgraced than the politicians. Michael Mabus says, I am not against a vaccine as long as it's proven to be safe and does not infringe my personal liberties and rights for no reason. Well, I don't know. That might not be your decision to make. Jaco Rapala says, well, if it's German economists, this is referring to migrants, they're all going to say that Syrians are necessary to do the jobs that Germans won't do. If they don't say that, they're not going to have a job for too long. Well, of course, Germany is the country that sectioned what a psychologist for criticizing German policy on COVID-19. Don from Beyond says, no studies on the combinations of vaccines. Well, over 100,000 Americans die every year from non-accidental mixing of drugs. And that doesn't seem, that's 100,000, over 100,000 a year. That doesn't seem to be, that's many more times the number of people that are going to die from COVID-19, but that doesn't seem to be a serious problem. It really doesn't seem to be a serious problem. Look at the number of people who die from pain relievers. One pain reliever in particular, paracetamol, they call it in Britain. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be a problem. Okay, and Kevin, you need to turn the lights on. Why? Well, let's see. That seems like too much light to me. Okay. Is that better? Is that more lifelike? Let me know. It's three points on the switch there. This is at the lowest level of lighting. Okay. Okay. PK Subban has not retired. All right then. Did he marry some famous sportswoman? Okay, let's talk about our movie today, which is from 2010, and it is called Let Me In, and it is written for the screen and directed by Matt Reeves. Matt Reeves made a film in 2008 called Cloverfield, which I thought was outstanding. He made this film 2 years later, and then very odd. I do not understand his career since then. In 2014, he made Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and then War for the Planet of the Apes. He's making genre films. How many Planet of the Apes films have there been? And in 2021, the DC Universe, apparently that's still a thing, is going to release The Batman. I rewatched this afternoon. I rewatched Let Me In. I've seen it several times. I was just so impressed by this on every level. He's an immensely talented man, and I wish that he could go back to making movies about people and their problems. So Let Me In is based on a novel called Let the Right One In by a Swedish writer, John Ajvide Lindqvist. Now, the director of the Swedish original, Let the Right One In, was very displeased that Hollywood was going to be remaking his film. But the author of the novel was quite pleased. Indeed, I think I would be quite pleased too if two movies were made out of one novel that I had written, and both of these movies were very highly regarded critically. Let's see. Let Me In, I suppose, was not a big box office smash, but it did all right, particularly when we're looking at DVD sales, Blu-ray sales, sales to television, and the like. So I should mention that Let Me In, it's really kind of a chamber movie. There's not a lot of actors in it. The male lead is Cody Smith McPhee, who was excellent in The Road, which is like the most depressing film ever made. Chloe Grace Moretz, she plays the female lead. She's very good in this. And she appeared in a couple of episodes of 30 Rock in a comedic role. She was very impressive. I don't want to say anything more about her because I've read about her personal life, and it's very depressing. And Elias Koteas and Richard Jenkins, both fine actors, play the other two. They play major supporting roles. The movie is exceptionally well cast. You know, when you're talking about child actors, a great deal of the credit for their achievement has to go with the director or the coach, if they had one, because children lack the self-consciousness in order to be able to act. So what's this movie about? Well, it's about evil. There's no question that it's about evil. That Ronald Day, it's set in Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1983. Now, of course, Los Alamos, New Mexico was the home of the Manhattan Project, which designed the atomic bomb. A very evil thing indeed. And there's only one reference to this. There's a scene, a quite horrifying scene, in a pedestrian underground walkway where someone with spray paint has painted a large mushroom cloud. It's very, very subtle there. We see Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan appears on television many times in this film. And of course, this was in the Cold War. And Reagan is railing against the evil empire of the Soviet Union. And he says that there is sin and evil in the world. Now, that's not really a scientific concept, is it? And we see different kinds of evil in this film. This is a film about bullying. That's one part of it. And so we see that there are, levels to bullying. There are, top bullies, middle bullies, and bullies lower down on the scale. I thought that the bullying aspect of the film was handled most sensitively, particularly since the Cody Smith McPhee's character, Owen, he is a victim of what you would call motiveless malignity. And motiveless malignity is one of the things that leads people to suspect that that sin and evil do exist in the world, that original sin exists in the world. Children are bullied for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's a character building or team building exercise. Very much not so in this film. Owen's character, well, he's small and weak and timid, and he has a high voice. He's not sarcastic. He's not a know-it-all. He's not disgusting or unusual, particularly unusual. And yet he is relentlessly bullied by a gang of 3 of his classmates who are led, at first, by a young man who looks remarkably like the young Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. This is a horror film, so we are dealing with that kind of evil as well. But Owen has a rather miserable home life. Well, exceedingly miserable home life. His mother, who is slovenly and a drunk, is separated from her husband, Owen's father, who's just left the picture. It's clear that he hasn't seen his son in quite some time and doesn't seem in any particular hurry to do so. His mother also seems to have succumbed to a kind of religious mania. And it's very clever what Matt Reeves does with the character of the mother. We never really see her. We never really see her face. And this tells us symbolically just how little importance she is to her son's life. And there's one scene that's photographed very cleverly where they're seated across each other at a dinner table, a small dinner table, and so you can't miss her face. but this is shot out of focus, so it just becomes a blur. I should mention the cinematography is by Greg Fraser, and it is beautiful. It is truly beautiful. You know, James Wong Howe said that you should always show the light source in your scenes, and he follows that rule. We get a lot of halogen lighting, outdoor halogen lighting, and so this is a story about what a ghoul, and we get a lot of ghoulish lighting, but it is achieved naturally. Of course, most of the film is shot at night for a reason that will become obvious. It's shot in scope with wide-angle lenses, and so you get, much like Dean Cundy's photography in The Thing, you get these beautiful flares, lines of blue and purple, and the like. As I say, cinematography is outstanding. The music is by Michael Giacchino, and it's good. It is not obtrusive. It's not hammering down on jump scares. It's not, oh no, something really bad's going to happen here. You know, it is not overwrought and manipulative the way that almost all movie music is today. When we first see Abby, who Chloe Grace Moretz's character, we get a kind of choir-like music, angelic, you know, and later that becomes mutated as her nature becomes clear. Owen is 12 years old, and he's a very lonely boy. He's a voyeur as well, and what is clearly an homage to the 6th episode of Kieslowski's Decalogue. We see him with his telescope in his room, and the apartment complex he lives in is set up much like the one in Kieslowski's TV film, whereby he can spy on people, and he does regularly. There's all sorts of interesting things going on in these apartments, all sorts of interesting romantic, sexual things, and he is taking it all in. Of course, he's desperately ashamed of this when he's caught out, in the same way that we learn that, well, since his mother seems to be continually drunk and he likes sweets, he steals from her. He steals from her on a regular basis. And I put up a screen capture on my Twitter account of a scene, and again, it's not overdone, where he is stealing a $20 bill from his mother's purse. And I will point out that to a 12-year-old, $20 was a lot of money in 1983. And he sees that there is a picture of, a very sentimental picture of Jesus, which has been slipped up. So it's attached to the mirror, and it's as if, you know, Jesus is watching him, knowing that he's stealing from his mother. This is another example of, you know, how this film is suffused with the idea of sin. Now, what does a 12-year-old boy want? Well, I suppose TV leads us to believe that what they want is sex. You know, what they want is what they see in the pornography, which they all watch on the internet. Well, this was filmed in 1983, but I suspect that 12-year-old boys are still a lot more innocent and sentimental than the media would have us believe. A 12-year-old boy, Owen, he wants romance, but he wants sentimental romance. He wants juvenile, adolescent romance. And we see that the tragedy of this film is that he's going to be locked into this for the rest of his life, which is a truly horrifying prospect. The film begins with a very long shot of a trail of vehicles roaring down a highway outside Los Alamos, and it's elevated there, and it snows a lot in the winter. There's an awful lot of snow in this film, and it is photographed just exquisitely, falling from the sky, even drifting through open windows. And so there's a unusual patient being rushed to the hospital, and he's a criminal suspect, because we learn that the police detective, played by Elias Koteas, has been investigating a number of recent murders and has come to the conclusion that there is some sort of satanic or otherwise occult gang killing people. And this man is unusual because he has acid burns covering most of his body, and they are third-degree burns, and his face is largely melted away. So he's brought to the hospital, and the detective is asking questions of a nurse about, oh, apparently he has a daughter, a young daughter. And then we hear a scream from a nurse, and the mystery man, has thrown himself out a window to his death. Later we will return to that scene, and we are given much more information. Then we return to 2 weeks earlier, and we find that the man is played by Richard Jenkins, and he is Abby's, the young girl's, father, or so we are led to believe. And there's a number of, say, false trails. You know, there's a suggestion some sort of pedophilic relationship. Well, then, no, that is not there. We see Owen in his bedroom wearing a mask and clutching a knife and talking, you know, to some girl. You like this girl? You like this little girl? Suggesting that he harbors fantasies of being a rapist or rapist murderers, and that's a false trail too. No. You see, what happens is that the bullies call him a little girl. There's something to this, because he is rather feminized, and he is short and weak and unassertive, and that we see in his relationship with Abby, who insists that she is not a girl, that she takes the lead. That she takes the lead and becomes dominating. That she has been, throughout the movie, grooming him for something monstrous, as it turns out. This is an intensely romantic film. That there's new people moving in next door to Owen and his drunk mother, and Owen needs to know everything that's happening in the building, and he discovers that there's some late middle-aged man, and there's a girl about his age, and he sees her, and then he's out by the jungle gym, or whatever you want to call it, which of course is covered in snow. He sees this girl, and it's his new neighbor, and she's this blonde-haired girl with long hair, and she's not wearing any shoes. She's not even wearing socks. She doesn't get cold, she says. And the first thing that she says to him is, I can't be your friend. Later, she says to him in the next meeting, leave me alone. You know, she's drawing him in by pushing him back. Abby is a doe-eyed enchantress, but later she is revealed to be, in the words of John Keats, La Belle Dame sans merci, the beautiful woman without mercy. I'll read from that poem. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she gazed and sighed deep, and there I shut her wild, sad eyes, so kissed to sleep. And there we slumbered on the moss, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all, who cried, La Belle Dame sans merci hath thee enthralled. I saw their starved lips in the gloom, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the hedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. But Owen is captivated by this 12-year-old girl, and for an obvious reason, you know, that he's come up with this fantasy of an ideal love affair. And of course, there are references. He's studying Romeo and Juliet in school, which he says is boring. Abby, on the other hand, indicates that she does not think it is boring. Together in all eternity, which is the theme of this film, except eternity for one and not the other. I suppose if you don't want me to spoiler this and you don't know what this film is actually about, you should stop listening at this point. And we get the reveal at 31 minutes into the film that Abby is a vampire. And she is a vampire in the body of a 12-year-old girl. She has been 12 years old for a very long time, she later tells Owen. And her father is not, in fact, her father. And Owen is later appalled. There's many scenes in which he's appalled, but he keeps coming back. Such is the draw of the vampire, the femme fatale. When he discovers that old, bald Richard Jenkins was actually once Abby's age. And it's at that point that he realizes why he is being groomed, and why he is being groomed, and what his fate is to be. The movie is very good at bringing us into the horror of Owen's situation. Gradually, we learn that Abby has, powers which are not given to ordinary mortals. For instance, the ability to, scale trees very quickly, or to scale up the sides of buildings, including at least 10-story high hospital building. And we get that very romantic scene, sort of an archetypal scene, that it's night, and you hear a sound at the window, and the window opens, and it's your beloved, or that which you imagine to be your beloved. Can I come in? I want to lay beside you. And this actually happens in the film. And Owen, of course, has no social standing whatsoever. And he asks her, can we go steady? And what does that mean? Does it require anything in particular from me? No, it doesn't. So Abby tells Owen that they can go steady. And I don't know what going steady means to Owen in 1983 at 12 years old. He is a boy whose greatest pleasure seems to be bubble gum, buying and consuming various kinds of bubble gum. A very good evocation of 1983. The way that people talked, the way that they dressed, excellent soundtrack. You've got Furs, Doot Doot. You've got Let's Dance by David Bowie. You have a particularly inspired usage of Blue Oyster Cult's Burnin' For You, with the words by Richard Meltzer, and it's very appropriate for the scene. And so if he's got a girlfriend, then obviously his status is going to be raised. But these bullies are absolutely relentless. And the father, or caretaker, Richard Jenkins, he's off his game. His role is to provide blood for Abby. That has been his role for decades. But he's old, and as he says, tired now. Also, there's a lot of snow on the ground in Los Alamos, and it's slippery. And, surprising people in their cars, killing them, dragging them off to the woods, and draining of their blood is a strenuous activity and easy to get wrong. And we learn that Abby is getting rather fed up with her caretaker, and he begs her not to speak to that boy again, because he sees it too, that he's being shunted out of the picture, that she's grooming someone else. But we see her power, that There's one scene where he has to go out. Are you going out? She says. Well, I guess I have no choice, he says, and he's thoroughly ticked off. And then she comes up behind him, puts her arms around him, and then he turns around and he puts her head on her shoulder. It is touching and, deeply sinister at the same time. The bullying reaches a crescendo, with a greater crescendo to come, when the class, they're all taken to the ice outside. People can play, boys can play hockey, girls can skate, and there's a dead body in the ice. The result of Richard Jenkins' botched blood taking. But meanwhile, Owen has been advised by Abby to fight back. And if there's three of them, to fight back even harder, to fight back harder than you thought that you could. And so he finds the pole with which Richard Jenkins had pushed the victim into the water, and he thinks, well, this would be a useful weapon. And then the Brian Wilson-looking bully comes with his two bully friends, and what are you going to do with that? You're not going to do nothing, little girl. In fact, I'm going to shove this up your ass, etc., etc. And he goes to move on Owen, and Owen whacks him upside the head and splits his ear, and I must confess that I felt a stab of savage, atavistic joy when I saw that. And later he collapses to the ground, screaming and sobbing in pain, and I don't think I've ever seen a more deserved punishment. Later we learn that the bully is being bullied by his own elder brother, and he becomes chief of the bullies. He mocks his younger brother for the injury he suffered and calls him little girl too, but then I guess it's the code of the bully that no such outrage must go unpunished. And a truly great crescendo of bullying is the great final set piece of the movie. Owen wants to speak to his mother about sin and evil, but she's passed out because he's learned of the nature of Abby, and it's inexplicable to him, because he's brought up in a rationalist society, and his mother is become a Jesus freak, as they used to say, and she's unreliable, slovenly, and drunkard. And so he calls up his estranged father, and I suppose it's in the nature of such conversations that as soon as poor Owen brings up the subject of evil, his father says, "Oh, you've been listening to your mother. Your mother's got to you." And this poor boy is just, shaking in fear and weeping over the phone. And Dad is simply looking at this as an excuse to get back at his estranged wife. It is a very sad and moving scene. So there is a final confrontation with the bullies. All the obstacles have been removed, and Abby leaves Los Alamos with Owen in tow. She is hidden, and he's still a child. He still has his different kinds of gum, the big bubble gum on top of the hiding place, and he is reconciled to this being his life, to the triumph of evil. Now, when I was praising this movie on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, people were saying, one person in particular was saying that, well, it's very well made, well acted, good cinematography and the like, but the movie was sickening because of the triumph of evil. Well, there's a very subversive element to this film, and I don't know how many people got it, and the subversive element is cherchez la femme. It's always the woman. This is very much an anti-feminist movie because it's an observation about how women enslave men and get them to do their bidding, no matter how obnoxious it is, or no matter how much it is not in the man's best interest. And if you look at that film with that in mind, it becomes quite a satisfying condemnation of feminism. Poor Abby, she's so weak, she's so pale, she doesn't have shoes, she doesn't seem to know anything about the world. She doesn't even know what a Rubik's Cube is. She doesn't know what going steady is. She must be protected. She's had a rough life, and I'm just the man or boy to protect her. And it's very amusing in that sense. And this is this film, the American version of Let Me In, Matt Reeves' version, gives you something very special and something which is very subversive. This was rewatching this movie again. It was a very intense and emotional experience for me because, on the one hand, it's a vampire film, and it's about the triumph of evil, and but it's a very, very romantic film, and I found myself watching this, remembering what it was like to be a 12-year-old boy myself, and the very naive, sentimental opinions, or feelings rather, that I had about love and relations with women and what that would mean. This is one of my very favorite films, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. So, let's see. Michael Mabus says vampires need a human handler in order to inflict their evil on the world. MGTOW versus vampires. Yes. Okay. David Robertson says, look at what peacock hens do to their cocks. You know the cliche of the rabbit, the highly sexed rabbit, right? You all know about it, the expression breeding like rabbits. Well, if you've ever had the opportunity to observe rabbits, as I have, I was quite surprised to see the reality. I once lived in a house where there was a rabbit pen, of quite considerable size, with a hutch outside. I won't go into rabbits, how they're very bad pets to have. You can't keep them indoors because they destroy everything. And if they're outdoors, they dig tunnels, which run for hundreds of feet in every direction, and your neighbors will start, their ankles will get twisted when they fall into the holes that the rabbits have dug. But it is not the male that takes the lead in the procreation of the rabbits. It's the female. The female rabbit will chase the male rabbit around and around, jump on his back, biting his neck, and imitate the act of procreation. I guess the idea is the male rabbit is too stupid to understand how this works, and the woman the female has to do it. Donna Robertson, not many flat surfaces in Los Alamos. I just gathered from the movie that it's in a valley. Okay. Has anyone contracted HIV from a vampire in cinema? That angle must have been taken, or at least suggested. Now this is going to bother me now, that the idea of HIV resulting from a kind... Oh no, well, not exactly HIV, but this movie, The Hitcher, which was critically reviled, absolutely reviled, and I wondered why, and I watched it, and because it's an allegory of homosexual initiation. That's why the critics reviled it so much. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up the show. As I said earlier, on the book club tomorrow, we are going to be discussing Walker Piercy's very, very deep and yet highly entertaining book, Lost in the Cosmos. And on Theater Thursday next week, we are going to be talking about a comedy. in fact, a farce. And it is called Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, directed by Frank Tashlin in 1957. And it's a very prophetic movie about celebrity, the cult of celebrity, and social media. And it stars, besides Jane Mansfield, who I mentioned yesterday, was not starved. It stars the great Oklahoman Tony Randall. So that's all for tonight. I would like to thank you all for listening and or watching. If you like the show or any part of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you clicked on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you would like to contribute to the stream, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I will take my leave of you, and with my customary hope that in this time of total atomization, you do manage to maintain human contact. Good night.